The government is considering whether to put Portugal back on its quarantine list because of a rising number of coronavirus cases. That would mean anyone who's currently in the country would have to self-isolate for 14 days when they arrive back in the UK. Our Europe correspondent Michelle Clifford has sent this report from Albufeira in Portugal.
This is a longed-for sight in Portugal. British tourists back on the beaches. Most stayed away because of quarantine rules earlier this year, but rushed to book their tickets when the measures were lifted 2 weeks ago. The problem is, it seems self-isolation at home is returning. And that leaves the Ashford family facing major problems. 7 of them travel to the Algarve for a 60th birthday celebration. But 2 of the group have to be back at work on Monday. Finding a flight to get out is proving difficult.
Yeah, we were looking at flights for Thursday and Friday, but the ones that I looked at last night, there were only 2 seats left and the prices are going up every time you look at them.
Most tourists admit they took a risk travelling anywhere at the moment, but few imagined quarantine rules could be reimposed here so soon. This group of friends chose Portugal precisely because restrictions had been lifted so recently.
We were all going to go to Croatia, and then it was so quick. As soon as it got put on the quarantine list, everyone was all on the messages being like, oh, let's go to Portugal because it's just been taken off. And so we all booked it really quickly, but unfortunately it's probably about to be put back on as well.
Many tourists told us they chose the Algarve because of the low incidence of COVID-19 here. And tourism bosses argue the area should be left off any restrictions. They question why entire countries have to be penalised.
The figures shows that only a little bit over 2 people per 100,000 inhabitants have been infected so far. So we believe that the British government wouldn't penalise the Algarve when all the infections are taking place in places like Lisbon and Oporto.
It's not just here in Portugal where there's frustration about quarantine rules that encompass the whole country. People travelling from Greece to Scotland will now have to self-isolate, even though parts of Greece are barely affected by COVID. And families like the Murgatroyds are worrying about whether England will join Scotland in imposing similar rules. The family of 5 is in Greece and dreading the thought of quarantine.
Kids would have another couple of weeks off school, which they've already had a long time off school.
They're missing their friends, they're missing that interaction with other people, and I think just some normality would be great. If we had to quarantine for another 14 days, it's just, it's just disheartening, really.
Uncertainty and risk have become unfamiliar features of a week in the sun for UK travellers, but it's a reality we'll all have to get used to. Michelle Clifford, Sky News, the Algarve, Portugal.
Let's get you up to date with the sport now. Here's Ed.
This sports bulletin is brought to you by Vitality, committed to getting 100 million people 20% more active by 2025.
I was let go by McLaren, and in fact at this very track when I was driving for Benetton, a journalist came up to me and said, "What are you going to do next year?" I said, "Well, I'm driving for Benetton, I hope." They said, No, Patrese got your job, didn't you know?" And this was like August. It really hurts, and I'm not a multiple champion. How do you feel that Ferrari have said they don't want you for next year? Are you resigned to it? Are you hurt? Are you angry?
Well, I generally move on. So, but since obviously you've asked the question, I think a decision is a decision, and I'm a professional in that regard, and I take I have to take any decision. You know, the way could have been maybe a bit different, but it is what it is, and whatever might be my feeling about it, I owe them respect and give them everything I can, and trying to, have the best season that we can, despite the difficult situation.
Your career has always been on the up, with you in control. Suddenly you're not in control. How does that feel?
Exciting, to be honest. Exciting in the way that if one door shuts, I think another one will open. So whatever that door will be, I don't know yet, is the honest answer. It might be, I don't know, staying in Formula One. It might be racing something else. It might be saying goodbye for a certain time, for good. Not here to just participate, not here to be a Formula One driver, not here to, make money. I'm really here to, to achieve something. But things need to be right.
Could you do like Kimi's done, go back to a midfield to back end of the grid team? Have you got the motivation to do that?
I want to win, so I know that, and I think we all know that at the moment you need to be in a certain car to be able to win. That's probably not in the cards, and then you obviously I have to sort of evaluate.
Committed to getting 100 million people 20% more active by 2025.
Well, as a footnote to that, there was one bit of good news for the Brits at the US Open. Cameron Norrie making it through to the third round of a Grand Slam event for the first time in his career. He had a straight sets win over Argentina's Federico Coria. Stay with us on Sky News. Coming up next, clashes in the Commons over exams and taxes in the first Prime Minister's questions since the summer break. Hello again. The top stories for you here on Sky News. The German government has said the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny was poisoned by the nerve agent Novichok. Britain said Russia had a clear case to answer. More than 400 migrants have crossed the Channel to reach the UK in small boats, the highest number yet in a single day. And the government has announced a U-turn on lifting virus restrictions in parts of northwest England due to rising infection rates. Most pupils at secondary schools in England are now back in the classroom, and although the new term has barely started, there are already calls for next year's exams to be delayed to give children who have missed months of learning extra time to catch up. Here's Laura Bundock.
COVID closed these corridors But students are finally stepping back. Year 11 pupils Mason and Rajan have GCSEs looming, but little idea how or when they'll take their exams.
They need to make a final decision, just get it done, the right decision.
So the not knowing is hard?
Yeah, not knowing is the worst bit about it, because you don't know how to prepare for the exams.
It would definitely be good because we'd get a bit more time for revision and learning, but then again, how much have we got to catch up on? It's definitely going to be a challenge. Yeah.
You'll see that there's social distancing measures signage all around the corridors.
At Bristol Hall Academy in Birmingham, they've learnt to adapt. But 6 months out of the classroom has unsettled and disrupted learning. Now back to school, attention turns to next year's exams, with teachers wanting decisions and clarity.
It's such an exciting day today to see young people returning to our academies, and we're so pleased to see them. And we're all working towards those exams in May and June of next year. We hope for some additional time, but we'll support our students and do everything that we possibly can to ensure that they're in a great position next summer to go to those exams with real confidence.
There's a combination of issues facing schools over exams. As they plan and prepare for next year's GCSEs and A-levels, the row over this year's results rumbles on.
Difficult questions are still being asked about the controversial grading algorithm. The exam regulator saying there were better options.
Our initial advice to the Secretary of State was that the best way to handle this was to try to hold exams in a socially distanced manner. That our second option was to delay exams, but the third option, if neither of these was acceptable, would be to have to try and look at some form of calculated grade. It was the Secretary of State who then subsequently took the decision and announced, without further consultation with Ofqual, that exams were to be cancelled.
As pupils come back to class, it is a testing time for the education system, restoring confidence after a summer of chaos. Laura Bundock, Sky News, Birmingham.
The Chancellor Rishi Sunak has reassured Conservative MPs that there will not be a horror show of tax rises with no end in sight. The government's facing a significant challenge to pay for the costs of coronavirus, and the Prime Minister has been challenged by the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer in a series of angry confrontations at Prime Minister's questions. Here's our political editor, Beth Rigby.
Morning, Prime Minister. The sun may be shining and Mr Johnson may be smiling, but this a Prime Minister still very much in the eye of the storm. Arriving in the Commons to face MPs, his difficult summer goes on. The Labour leader pressing the PM on the exams fiasco.
When did the Prime Minister first know there'd be a problem with the algorithm?
Mr Speaker, as he knows perfectly well, Ofqual made it absolutely clear time and again that in their view the system that was in place was robust.
Bubbling Tory discontent weaponised by the opposition.
The MP for Broxbourne has said the government says one thing on Monday, changes its mind on Tuesday, something different is presented on Wednesday. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's mess after mess. His own MPs, U-turn after U-turn. It's a fundamental issue of competence. God knows what's going on. There's no grip. When the government's notched up 12 U-turns and rising, the only conclusion is serial incompetence. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility and finally get a grip?
Mr Speaker, I take full responsibility for everything that has happened under this government, in spite of the negativity and the constant sniping from the opposition. We are seeing a country that is not only going back to school, but going back to work.
But not in Bolton and Trafford, as another government U-turn, this time on lifting the local lockdown, dropped in the middle of PMQs. And for all the optimism from the PM, hard truths for the Chancellor on a visit today to promote his scheme for youth employment.
Has it been difficult?
Really difficult. There's not much going on.
And hard truths for the public. The £2 trillion debt mountain must be managed. Tax rises inevitable.
We've put in place unprecedented support for the economy, for people, their jobs, their homes, their livelihoods during this time. But of course, it's right that over time we have sustainable public finances. I think everyone understands we can't carry on doing exactly what we did this year forever.
Hard truths too for MPs behind closed doors. The PM and his Chancellor privately meeting the 2019 intake to warn of tougher times ahead and asked for their support.
There'll always be grumbling from some colleagues, but I think as long as the government sticks to the, that proper plan for the future, that levelling up agenda, which the Prime Minister outlined so well, right after the election, saying we've got to repay that trust that the British people have placed in us, I think it's really important that colleagues also trust the government in that long-term strategy that they've got for the future of the country.
Summer tough, winter will be harder still. Trying to contain a health crisis and manage a severe recession while getting the public finances in order is the perfect storm. Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Now, on the latest Sky News Daily podcast, Dermot Monaghan's been talking about the Chancellor's new Kickstart programme aimed at the young long-term unemployed with our business correspondent Paul Kelso. He's also spoken to one young woman about her personal experience losing her job during the pandemic and the impact that's had on her and her family. And that is available now from wherever you get your podcasts. Sky News analysis has revealed that since lockdown restrictions eased in July, almost half of new infections are now among younger people in their 20s and 30s. Meanwhile, as we head towards a possible second wave, one community leader has warned the government needs to target its response in deprived areas to avoid it. Our science and medical correspondent Thomas Moore has this.
After the long lockdown, not even the rain keeps people at home. In Soho, central London, the pandemic feels a distant menace.
We have to live. Life is too short.
People are a bit more reckless, which I've been guilty of doing at times.
Are we all willing to live our lives indoors, just waiting and waiting and waiting? I'm certainly not.
Since lockdown was eased in July, the epidemic has shifted towards the young. Data analysis by Sky News shows at the beginning of July, people aged over 80 accounted for 10% of all new cases. Now it's just 5%, and almost half of all new infections are in those in their 20s and 30s.
The World Health Organization says the epidemic is changing with the same shift from old to young elsewhere in Europe, Australia and Japan. But scientists just don't know what happens in the autumn, where the weather gets colder and we move back indoors. Will it be the elderly who once again bear the brunt?
Nearly everywhere in the country is getting infections.
Tim Spector has also seen the epidemic change. He tracks the infection through the 4 million people using the app for the COVID symptom study, watching the virus rise and fall in hotspots around the country, but so far not sparking a second wave.
It's telling us that it's not transmitting as rapidly from some of these smaller outbreaks to the big cities. So it seems to be we're getting these isolated little bonfires, if you like, but they're not connecting, they're not jumping to the nearest big city and taking over.
Blackburn, one of the viral bonfires.
The poorer that you are, the more highly you are going to be affected by this pandemic.
Nobody understands the local community better than Zafar Khan. These tightly packed neighbourhoods with 3, even 4 generations under one roof are fuel for the virus. Social inequalities have been sharply exposed by the pandemic.
When the dust settles, I think people will realise that the government has made a disaster of this crisis. They need to really look after these areas, because if they don't, what will happen is we will have greater surges in infection rates.
Intensive testing and contact tracing, backed up with social restrictions where needed, have so far contained the virus. But with a vaccine still a distant prospect and most of the population lacking any immunity, it seems inevitable that the virus will trigger a second wave. What scientists are less sure of is who it'll infect and how many. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Let me tell you about a special programme now on Sky News next week. Climate After COVID, a green recovery. We'll consider the current state of climate change and the choices confronting governments, businesses and the rest of us in tackling it. So can health, wealth and global warming be balanced? If you'd like to join our virtual audience on the 10th of September, a week today, then please do email climateaftercovid@sky.uk. Climate After COVID, all one word, at sky.uk. OK, time to join our colleagues now at Business Day TV.
A very good morning to you. I'm Alicia Seckham in Johannesburg with a look at your African business news. Nigeria is looking to its mining sector for growth. The West African nation plans to have 50 mines in operation by 2023. Africa's largest oil producer is banking on that sector to diversify its income and revive its finances following a collapse in crude prices earlier this year. Nigeria's mines minister hopes the industry will grow tenfold over the next 5 years to account for 3% of GDP. He says the country is particularly interested in the processing of barite, which is used in drilling for oil and gas, and plans to sell it to countries like Ghana and South Africa, which need the mineral to exploit new oil discoveries. COVID-19 has served up a mixed bag for South Africa's Libstar. The food producer was able to take advantage of the country's national lockdown as South Africans were forced to cook at home. And this helped its retail and wholesale division grow revenue by 10.7% during the half year. But the lockdown shattered the restaurant industry, which weighed on the group's food service division. Libstar also had to contend with rising costs as it had to provide staff with protective equipment, and this caused a dip in headline earnings of 9%. Going forward, the company says its diversified product mix will allow it to take advantage of any consumer trends that emerge. Great Dyke Investments says it's on track with funding plans for its Zimbabwe project. That's after the pandemic delayed talks with lenders. The Russian-Zimbabwean joint venture expects to raise up to $500 million for the first phase of the project and aims to have that bedded down by year end. That's as mining operations are meant to kick off in 2021. Its CEO says 5 institutions are participating in a syndicated funding round led by the African Export-Import Bank, but declined to name them. Now for a look at other news in brief. Sub-Saharan Africa's COVID-induced economic slump could last for 3 years. That's according to Ghana's finance minister. He says many nations are facing economic contractions of up to 15% and severe liquidity challenges. Nigeria plans to become a net exporter of gasoline and other petroleum products over the next 2 years and reverse its dependence on imports. The Department of Petroleum Resources says 5 refineries are being built across the country and another 7 are being planned. Angola secured debt relief from the Paris Club of Creditors. The body says the reprieve will be in place until the end of this year. Angola, which is heavily reliant on oil revenues, has been reeling from the fallout of the pandemic and weak oil prices. And Zimbabwe plans to reopen schools later this month for students that need to take their final exams. The move comes 6 months after educational facilities were closed due to COVID-19. Let's check in on how African markets have been performing now, starting off as usual in Southern Africa first. As you can see there, across the board, muted performances coming through. Botswana's domestic index and South Africa's oil share a touch lower by their respective finishes. Zambia's LUSC in the meantime flat. In West Africa, flat performances being put on by both Ghana's composite index and Nigeria's oil share. The BRVM index in the Ivory Coast, however, down 1.3%. In East Africa, Kenya's NSE 20 traded 0.83% higher. Uganda's composite registering larger gains with its 1.5% climb. The Semdex in Mauritius, however, moving in the opposite direction, down 0.4% on the day. On the currency front, in Southern Africa, a dollar gets you 11 Botswana Pula, 16.8 South African rands and 19 Zambian kwacha. In West Africa, a dollar is 5 Ghanaian cedi, nearly 554 Ivory Coast francs and 385 Nigerian naira. In East Africa, a dollar gets you 108 Kenyan shillings, 39 Mauritian rupees and 3,683 Ugandan shillings. And that's your African business and markets news from Johannesburg. I'm Alicia Seckham, and it's back to you now at the Sky News Centre in London.
Coming up in a few minutes, Harry and Meghan become Hollywood royalty after signing a deal with Netflix. It's the deal which you might say completes their move to become the Duke and Duchess of Hollywood. Well, Prince Harry and Meghan already have the house, they certainly have the fame, and now they have the film contract. The couple have agreed a multi-year deal with Netflix to make movies and programmes for the online giant. Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills reports.
Harry and Meghan quickly wanted to get down to a new way of working in America. Now the groundwork has paid off, landing them their first big deal. Netflix, the streaming service that's done so well out of that series about Harry's relatives, has now signed up the Sussexes to make their own programmes. In a statement, the couple said, through our work with diverse communities and their environments to shining a light on people and causes around the world, our focus will be on creating content that informs but also gives hope. As new parents, making inspirational family programming is also important to us, as is powerful storytelling through a truthful and relatable lens. Diversity on screen as well as behind the camera will be one of their focuses as they create programmes about issues we've often heard them talk about before.
Without something to aim for, you can't unlock the potential.
Exactly. A nature docuseries and an animated series about inspiring women are already in the making. Meghan was, of course, an actress before becoming a duchess. And last year, Harry was overheard talking to an executive from Disney about his wife and potential voiceover work. But some will inevitably question how much experience the couple really have.
And some people say that they haven't got that much TV experience in terms of production, but of course Meghan really does know about how it works in terms of television. And it doesn't matter anyway, because Netflix will be giving advice. The main thing that Meghan and Harry will want to make sure of is that they have control on the type of content that goes out there. And that's why it's such a clever move on their part.
Harry's uncle, Prince Edward, knows the pitfalls of getting into television production after this disaster in the 1980s.
His Royal Highness, the tantalisingly eligible Prince Edward, coaxing courage.
Harry and Meghan may no longer be working royals, but as members of the family, everything they do is still being watched closely, bringing challenges but also a guaranteed audience too good to turn down for their new business partners. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News.
Let's have a look at the weather for you.
Get ready for safe skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Unsettled today with showers in the north and more general rain clearing across the south. So a fairly mild but windy start to the morning with outbreaks of rain over Wales and central England and a few showers in the northwest. The West Country will be rather murky and damp too. Wales and central England will dry up during the morning with sunny spells developing, while southern England will be largely overcast with patchy light rain moving in. Elsewhere, northern parts will see sunny spells and a scattering of showers. Temperatures much like Wednesday's, but windier in the south. Southern England will see cloud and what rain there is becoming confined to Kent during the afternoon, with sunny spells developing elsewhere. Showers in the north largely fading. Southern Britain will see cloud and outbreaks of fairly light rain moving in on Friday.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up at the top of the hour, what will Western powers do next after the German government said the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny was, without doubt, poisoned by Novichok? Poisoned with Novichok, President Putin's most prominent critic in what the Prime Minister calls an outrageous attack. Alexei Navalny follows the Skripals in becoming a victim of the weaponized nerve agent. His supporters say the Russian state must be involved. Also this morning, more than 400 migrants crossed the Channel to the UK, by far the highest number in a single day. Government U-turn over virus advice as hundreds of thousands of people are told you can't, after all, start socialising at home. Marked down 2 over pupils' exams as MPs are told ministers went against advice. Plus Hollywood royalty, the Duke and Duchess signing a multi-year deal to make programmes and films. And we'll take a look at this morning's front pages in the press preview. Hello, very good morning to you. So the most significant domestic critic of Vladimir Putin was without doubt poisoned with Novichok, according to the German government. Angela Merkel said the attack on Alexei Navalny was attempted murder with the aim to silence him. The Russian opposition leader is in intensive care in a hospital in Berlin. Here, the government said Russia had a clear case to answer over an outrageous attack, while the Kremlin said it wasn't as yet able to respond. From Moscow, Diana Magnay has the latest.
It's been almost 2 weeks since Alexei Navalny fell into a coma on an early morning flight from Siberia. These his terrible cries of pain on board before he lost consciousness, which Russian medical staff attributed to low blood sugar levels. Now, this stark announcement from the German Chancellor.
Alexei Navalny was the victim of an attack with a chemical nerve agent of the Novichok group. This poison could be identified unequivocally in tests, so it's clear that Alexei Navalny is the victim of a crime. He was supposed to be silenced, and I, together with the entire German government, condemn this in the strongest possible terms.
Angela Merkel says she will discuss a response with EU and NATO partners. In a statement, the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab called the use of Novichok unacceptable. He said the Russian government has a clear case to answer. It must tell the truth about what happened to Mr. Navalny. But will it? Alexei Navalny is the man President Putin famously refuses to mention by name. He is the Kremlin's most outspoken critic and a tireless anti-corruption campaigner. His family and his foundation have always maintained this is the direct work of the Kremlin. But the tone from the top, true to form, remains dismissive. The Kremlin saying they're prepared to cooperate with German authorities, but that they want more information from the German side.
If Russian authorities theoretically would be so greatly barbaric that they decided to poison Alexei Navalny, what's the reason to send him to the Germany? No reason. The Russian authorities not barbaric. We are Putin and his team not poisoning his political opponents.
Alexei Navalny has always lived on borrowed time. His latest smart voting initiative to strip votes off the ruling United Russia Party in next week's regional elections is a strategy the Kremlin has not taken kindly to.
It's a big question to government of the West countries. Do you really understand who you're going to have a deal as the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin? Are you preparing to accept it? People might be killed, might be poisoned, and after that, you will do business as usual?
Now, the only credible figure within Russia's opposition lies in a coma on a ventilator in a German hospital. For its part, the Kremlin says they have no proof that he was poisoned, and they still refuse to launch a criminal investigation. Diana Magnay, Sky News, Moscow.
The list of victims Russia has been accused of poisoning is long. Before Alexei Navalny, there was Sergei Skripal, the former Russian intelligence officer, found unconscious with his daughter Yulia on a Salisbury Park bench. They survived, unlike Dawn Sturgis, exposed to the same nerve agent in the city months later. The former spy Alexander Litvinenko was also killed by the radioactive agent polonium-210. And 16 years ago, Ukraine's pro-Western President Viktor Yushchenko was badly disfigured after he was poisoned. Our Foreign Affairs editor Deborah Haynes reports.
Enemies of the Kremlin. Opposition politician Alexei Navalny, former spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia, all allegedly poisoned with a Russian Novichok nerve agent. Questions mounting for President Vladimir Putin.
Using Novichok again is clearly a signal that there's a sense of impunity, that there's a sense that there is no comeback for the people who are using this in Russia, the Russian agents. And so we get back to our question about whether President Putin knows about this or doesn't know about this. And it seems you can't have it both ways.
The Skripals were targeted in Salisbury 2 years ago. The UK accused Russia's military intelligence agency, the GRU. It identified these two men, seen here on the streets of Salisbury on the day of the attack. The Kremlin denied the claims. The suspects even saying they were tourists.
When actually we're going there to see the Stonehenge, Old Sarum and the cathedral. But it didn't work out because of this slush. The whole city was covered with slush. We got wet, so we went back to the train station and took the first train to go back.
The UK and its allies punished Moscow, expelling dozens of Russian diplomats. But the news Novichok has been used again will be a cause for deep concern.
These Novichoks came from the Russian chemical warfare program, developed in the 60s, 70s and 80s. Although in 2017, the Russians declared they'd got rid of all their chemical weapons. So that was not the case.
The Skripals survived their Novichok poisoning. Knowledge of how to treat the toxin could help to save Mr. Navalny. But how to stop this banned chemical weapon from being used once more? Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
Now, we have become all too used to seeing images of small groups of migrants being brought ashore in Dover. Well, on Wednesday, there were so many boats that their passengers were queued up in the town's harbour. More than 400 migrants arrived in the UK, nearly double the previous record. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, has more now from Westminster.
There's been calls from Conservative MPs, as you might expect, for tougher action to, first of all, apprehend some of these boats, and also tougher action from the French authorities. Now, that record figure of 409 is almost double the previous record, which was 235. That was on August the 6th. Now, during the day, the record day, the Border Force dealt with 27 incidents or 27 boats involving 409 people. And that compares with the previous 24 hours when it was just 18 incidents and 145 people. Now, in the Commons, the Prime Minister talked about criminal gangs, talked about people trying to gain access to the UK in dinghies and paddling pools. He promised tougher legislation. And later, after Prime Minister's questions in the Commons, there was an urgent question from Labour, answered by the Immigration Minister, Chris Philp. He was promising tougher action and more cooperation with the French.
We are working closely with our French colleagues to prevent these crossings. This includes patrols of the beaches by French officers, some of whom we fund, surveillance and intelligence sharing. Over 3,000 crossing attempts were stopped this year alone by the French authorities, and approaching 50% of all crossing attempts are stopped on or near French beaches. This morning alone, French authorities prevented at least 84 people from attempting this crossing.
Well, many MPs were not convinced by those claims and assurances by the Minister. For example, Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, has made several pledges to crack down on these sort of channel crossings. And as recently as the 11th of August, there was a joint action plan with the French launched. Now, many MPs are saying there needs to be tougher legislation. Some MPs were calling for the boats to be turned back when they leave France. The Minister, as the Prime Minister had earlier, did promise that the government would look at strengthening the law, but many MPs remain unconvinced, and this is becoming a major problem for the Home Secretary.
John Craig there. Well, hundreds of thousands of people in the northwest of England were allowed for a few short hours to socialise again at home. And then the government executed its latest U-turn and reversed the decision. Across the UK as a whole, there were 1,508 new cases of coronavirus reported, with 10 deaths related to COVID-19. But those cases are not spread evenly. There are a number of hotspots across the UK driving up numbers, including parts of Scotland and the northwest of England. In Scotland, the number of cases is 9.2 per 100,000, but it's more than twice that in East Renfrewshire and Glasgow, and higher again in West Dunbartonshire at 32.6. While in Bolton, the number of cases has trebled, rising to 66.6 per 100,000 people as of Sunday. And Trafford too, in Greater Manchester, has seen a significant rise in cases, going from 17.8 to 36.8 over the past fortnight. Tom Parmenter reports now on the local frustration and confusion.
Who do you listen to when everyone talking seems to be out of tune? The government, the council, the mayor, or your wife Tina over some fish and chips?
You just don't know where you are, really, do you? You know, we're trying our best.